Oh, I wonder what's going on out here. Oh! Oh no! Hey everyone, The Case of the Golden Idol is a game that left me wanting more. Developed by Color Grey Games and released in 2022, it drew me in through its brain-tickling gameplay and hooked me with its setting, style, and story to become one of my favourite games of the year. I knew nothing about this game going into it, but once it had its claws in me, it commanded my attention, until I reached the epilogue a single 4-hour session later. If you're a fan of mystery games, especially those like Return of the Obra Dinn, you owe it to yourself to stop watching this video now and go check out The Case of the Golden Idol. It is a more than worthy spiritual successor to that title, and you will get the most out of it if you go into it completely blind. So before I get my hands into the guts of this game, here is your obligatory and only spoiler warning. I'll still be here when you get back. For those of you happy to stick around, don't say I didn't warn you. At its heart, The Case of the Golden Idol is a mystery game, and at the heart of each mystery is the idol itself. The game consists of 12 scenarios in which you, the player, must solve the grisly deaths depicted within. Some of them are fairly mundane, some of them, aren't. But all of them can be traced back to the Golden Idol and the power it possesses. No matter where the death occurs, no matter when it takes place, the idol is usually present somewhere in the environment. Given you're never presented a character to play, you're just plonked down in any given scenario and told to figure out what happened, it's almost like you're playing as a present-day historian, piecing together the idol's gruesome journey across 18th century England to discover what ultimately became of it in the chaos of the game's climactic moments. It starts off simple, with its discovery and theft from a far-off land by two explorers, but that simplicity sloughs off quickly enough once it reaches England and slips away into a web of conspiracy and intrigue. It's one of those stories that really requires a second go-around to fully appreciate, a victory lap where you already have all the clues and can pick up the various hints now that you know where it's going. If you've played an adventure mystery game before, the gameplay is going to be familiar to you. I'm hardly the first person to compare The Case of the Golden Idol to Return of the Obra Dinn, but it's a surface-level comparison at most. I mean, they're only alternate history mystery games with Lovecraftian undertones about people from the British Empire fighting for control of a supernatural relic where the player is tasked with solving the deaths of just about everyone involved, but that's where the similarities end. Almost. Like in Obra Dinn, each of Golden Idol's scenarios are presented to you as a moment frozen in time, like you've used the idol to hit pause on reality, and that really is where the similarities end. There are two halves to the gameplay, exploring and thinking. While exploring, you're free to move around the environment, click on things, rifle through people's pockets, eavesdrop on conversations, look through cupboards or safes, even read books and letters. You're basically a very nosy ghost hunting for clues, and there are a ton to find. Just about everything you can interact with is relevant in some way, but the most important parts of the environment are the words you can add to your clue bag down on the bottom of the screen. This is how you use the information you discover during your exploration of a scenario to fill in the blanks on the thinking screen, because the game isn't just looking for the identity of the deceased or the method of their murder. It wants to know everything about any given scenario. The names of the people present, the timeline of events, the seating arrangements of a dinner party, even how the idol functions. The thinking screens can be daunting at first, especially in the later levels where they get really busy, but the game lets you know when each box is completed correctly, and even when you're one or two away from a solution. So once you're close to the answer, it's hard to lose it again. Each blank space is also color-coded so you know whether it wants a verb, or a noun, or a name. And just as a final helping hand to the player, you only need to complete the box describing how the death happened to succeed. The rest of them you can leave unfinished, although filling them in will usually help in figuring out what happened anyway. You don't need to find all the words in every scenario to solve each mystery either, given a fair amount of them are usually red herrings. You can swap between the two modes at the touch of a button, so if you feel like you need to go back and check something again while exploring, or change something around while thinking, you can, very easily. Aside from stealing words to post in your mind palace, it's worth taking note of everything you can interact with anyway, given most things provide context clues that, if they don't outright aid in cracking the case, add a lot of character to the setting, and sometimes even reveal part of the game's overall mystery. For an atmospheric example, this cigar box is missing a cigar. Look what little Pip's hiding in his pockets. Eh? The game is very adept at environmental storytelling like this. The best thing I can compare the gameplay to is a race car, something that's been stripped down to its core components for the sake of maximum efficiency. The case of the Golden Idol's gameplay loop at its core is super simple, but is able to achieve a satisfying progression of rising complexity scenario to scenario simply by including more variables or mixing up what you're meant to find. It's really impressive. Sure, there are one or two scenarios that push up against the limits of the gameplay mechanics. The ninth in particular is absolute hell. There is so much going on that I have no idea how you're meant to figure it out, even now knowing the answer and all the clues. I brute forced it for both my playthroughs, but aside from that one snag, I really enjoyed the gameplay. For this kind of title, it is absolutely perfect. If I had any genuine criticisms of it, it's that it can be easy to place the wrong word in the wrong blank space if there are lots of spaces close together. But that's pretty much it. The game comes with two difficulties. In the first, interactive objects or pertinent clues are highlighted, but for this second playthrough I decided to give the game a go on the higher difficulty, which removes those hints. I don't recommend that for a first playthrough. It was still plenty difficult even when I knew where I could click. If you do get really stuck, there is an inbuilt hint system, but this is not a game that believes in handouts. You can get 4 hints per scenario, but the game makes you work for them. It forces you to complete a separate task to prove that you've been paying attention and really are stuck before it even lets you look at them. Not that I think you'll need them very often. I only used one here in my second playthrough just to see how the hint system worked, but the mysteries are laid out in such a way that once you start pulling at one of the threads, binding the scenario together, the whole thing will usually unravel in your hands. Even just knowing who everyone is can be a huge step toward figuring out not only who died, but who did it and why. Sections of the thinking screen are only revealed to you as you find important pieces of the mystery around the environment, so you always know when you've stumbled onto something big. It might not be an outright hint, but it's definitely a nudge that you're headed in the right direction. But that's not the only incentive the game gives you to explore each area thoroughly. The case of the Golden Idol's presentation is absolutely fantastic. The style is like a cross between old-school pixel art adventure games like Escape from Monkey Island, the exaggerated features of political cartoons, and artwork of the era in which the game is set. Check out the depth of that background, or the arrangement of this party. Huh, that guy kind of looks familiar. The game uses its artistic influences to create something fresh. Everything comes across as very clear and very consistent, without sacrificing atmosphere or tone. Recurring characters almost always appear with the same portraits when you focus on them, even if they happen to be striking a different pose, wearing a different set of clothes, or even sporting a different name. Some of them might be ugly as sin, yeah, but they are definitely recognizable, which makes catching them in their lies all the easier, and all the more satisfying too. Hang on, that woman looks kind of familiar too. Huh. Beyond the game's art style, it's just refreshing to play something set in the late 18th century. It evokes a very different image from the rampant industrial change of the 1800s, which is far better represented in video games. The 18th century was still an age of change, but it was primarily political and ideological in nature rather than technological. It was an age of exploration and rampant exploitation, all painted over with a sickly yellow varnish of genteel decorum. It creates a certain image in your head, so when things do start going a little off script, it's much more of a shock. You'd expect this kind of thing in a game set in the 1800s. Here, it's a genuine surprise. The little loops of motion every scenario has add a lot to the atmosphere too. It's such a little thing, but ironically it creates a great sense of vitality despite the game's overwhelming focus on death, the force behind this exploding vase, the chaos after the sudden death at this dinner party, the jaunty tune accompanying this late night game of cards, the brewing paranoia that led to this quick shove beneath the storm clouds. None of them would be as effective if they were presented as still images. The music only completes the picture. Just have a listen. It matches the mood perfectly, but that's pretty much the long and short of the game's sound design. There aren't really any diegetic sound effects, only little whispers of the user interface when moving things around the thinking screen, or clicking through menu options. But maybe that's for the best, given what little voice acting there is for the game to boast. It played to its strengths by focusing on visuals, and especially the story. The Case of the Golden Idol is split into 4 chapters: Complications in the Family, The Cursed Inheritance, The Ascent, and The New Order, plus an epilogue and the occasional cutscene that give a little more context to things going on in the background. The story has a large cast for such a small game, but no clear protagonist other than the idol itself. It's an ambitious narrative for such a small game, but it weaves together the story of one extended aristocratic family, a shadowy brotherhood secretly pulling the strings of the empire, and the utopian dreams of one man pretty well. It's by no means a perfect story. The game doesn't go out of its way to answer every or even most questions it raises. The first chapter especially feels pretty disjointed from everything else. It barely even acknowledges the fact that it takes place in an alternate universe where Albion and Aquitaine, not England and France, fight over the ruins and relics of the Lemurian Empire from Lovecraftian lore, and you're left with huge gaps in the timeline thanks to the sometimes years-long time skips between scenarios. But the central story of the idol and the way it is told was so compelling that for me it just wasn't an issue. The game is called The Case of the Golden Idol, and by the time you finish the epilogue, that case is well and truly cracked, like a scrumptious Lindt chocolate egg. Wait, they're not a shitty company like Nestle too, are they? Oh no. In essence, the game is one big mystery made up of 11 smaller mysteries, and nowhere is that made clearer than in the final scenario, which features quick travel buttons to every other level in the game. So, let's solve it. The game begins in the climactic moments of a doomed expedition to Monkey Paw Island. 2 explorers have come seeking treasures of the past, and together they've filled their bags with ancient riches, including a certain mysterious idol. Tensions are high, the weather's turned frightful, and it is the perfect moment to send an unsuspecting victim of your paranoia hurtling over the edge. It is the first, but hardly the last murder committed for the sake of the idol. Years later, the idol has passed from Albert Cloudsley to his relation Sebastian, and he is clearly aware of the power it possesses. Or he was. He doesn't appear to be aware of much of anything anymore. A tragic accident has left him dead. It's a somber moment after the violence of the prologue, a single moment of peace before the flock of vultures that is Sebastian's inheritors arrive to pick his possessions clean. I wonder who's getting that fuck-ugly mask on the wall. The rich will spend money on anything. Anyway, moving on. The idol then passes not to any of Sebastian's relations, but to a friend of his, Willard Wright. Most of the family appears to be fine with that, but Peter Batley's deep in debt and was expecting to inherit more than a book of aphorisms. He orders the stable hands to take the idol off Willard, but things go pear-shaped pretty quickly. Seeing a man spontaneously combust right in front of him is enough to ward Peter away, but not Edmund Cloudsley. He is intrigued. Intrigued enough to send his man David Gorin to the Little Mermaid Inn to knife Willard Wright and take the idol between a round of cards. This brings Edmund to the attention of a mysterious group of which both Willard Wright and Sebastian were members. They see the idol as rightfully theirs, and they want it back. When diplomacy doesn't work out, the Darkhand Steward resorts to something a little more drastic. Edmund couldn't care less though. He's too busy researching the limits of the idol's powers when he isn't trying to woo Mary Richards away from Peter. So, naturally, nobody notices that the newly hired servant girl, Ada Baker, is actually on the payroll of the Darkhand Steward. To kill Edmund, she needs poison. This syringe has poison, but in order to make it look like an accident, she needs to add it to Edmund's Pepto tonic. Where's the tonic? In a safe. You know, this is all starting to sound very familiar. Ada pulls off the poisoning with aplomb, but the plan implodes when Rose asks for tonic water as well, and drinks the deadly concoction before Edmund does. Edmund goes into hiding to continue his experiments, but for that he needs a fresh corpse. Fortunately, famed highwayman Walter Keane happens to have one lying around, even if it is made of straw. Keane and his accomplices attack the cabin, but are undone by this fucking sleep paralysis demon of a dog and Edmund's know-how with the idol. Unfortunately, he defended himself a little too well and perished in the blast. Enter Lazarus Hurst, David Gorin's new employer, and a hopeful initiate for the Brotherhood. The Darkhand Steward, otherwise known as Walter Keane, vouches for him, enough even to risk his life in a ritual with his water snake counterpart. Looks like the Brotherhood's god, the Griffin, ruled in the Darkhand Steward's favour this time around. Fair and square. I'm sure a man of his good moral standing would never stoop to such underhanded methods as cheating. Lazarus Hurst rises up the ranks of the Brotherhood and even claims to be the Griffin Reborn. It seems when David Gorin was released from Edmund Cloudsley's services, he brought the idol to his new employer, which he has put to great use in performing miracles before the other higher-ups of the Brotherhood, powerful admirals like Alistair Koch, doctors like James Turner, and, oh, look who's here, attorneys too. Only the Brotherhood's leader Angus MacBain doubted Lazarus Hurst, but he, walked off a lighthouse, so I guess he was wrong.
Lazarus Hurst
is one of the most respected citizens in the state, MacBain.
But Captain, I have proof that he's head of an international drug cartel.
With Lazarus crowned the Griffin Reborn, the Brotherhood's purpose is shifting. No longer content to hide in the shadows behind their ridiculous masks, they are entering the world of politics as the New Order Party, but their rivals the Moderates and the Loyalists both have strong and popular leaders in Parliament. It's about time to deal with them. Organise a dinner party, kill one, frame the other, now there's no one left standing in the way. A few years later and things have changed. The New Order Party has an iron grip on Albion. Life is lived according to the four virtues. Even by the New Order Party's higher-ups, Lazarus accepted of course, under threat of having the years literally stripped away from you, and given to those considered more deserving of a longer life. The King still has enough power to ignore the New Order Party's authority, but don't worry, they have a plan to deal with him. The day of reckoning arrives, and the New Order Party embarks with their strange steam-powered contraptions to depose the King, but there's been a slight delay. In fact, by the time the player arrives on the scene, not only has there been a delay, the New Order Party has pretty well imploded. Lazarus Hurst has been blown to bits by Peter Batley with a cannon he won at cards over in The Little Mermaid. James Turner is lying dead at a crossroads, killed by Alistair Koch, after the two stumbled upon the idol while searching for Lazarus, and with so much power within reach, and no one around to witness any potential crimes, turned on each other. Shame the cannon had already blasted it apart, and David Gorin has just met his demise at the end of Walter Keane's rifle outside the cabin where they first met. Without anyone left to lead them, the New Order Party collapses overnight, the surviving higher-ups melt back into public anonymity, and the idol which caused so much pain and misery is reduced to a worthless hunk of scrap. The epilogue then jumps back to around 2/3 of the way through the story to spell out the last of the game's mysteries just in case you missed the clues. Lazarus Hurst is in fact none other than Edmund Cloudsley, who faked his death to get the Brotherhood off his back after Walter Keane's attack on the cabin, and used the idol to make himself young. The Brotherhood never realised the true potential of the idol, but rather than destroy them in retaliation, Edmund decided to consume them from within instead, and use their power and influence to create a world based on his utopian ideals. His assault on Sebastian's manor house was an attempt to kidnap the love of his life, Mary, while David Gorin's presence at the cabin was in response to a threat of blackmail by Walter Keane, who wanted the years stolen from him back and knew just the secret with which to arrange it. These revelations are why I think a second playthrough of this game is so important. The first chapter only feels disjointed at the start of the game because you don't have any of the pieces required to put the whole puzzle together, while on a repeat run, you understand how it all fits. Of course, that doesn't apply to absolutely everything in the game, but it doesn't really have to either. You're never given answers on who the Brotherhood actually are, or their original purpose before the idol came to their attention and Edmund took them over. It's never elaborated upon whatever other supernatural phenomena exist in this world, and much of the New Order's rise to power occurs off-screen. But while you are denied definitive answers, you are offered the chance to interpret the world how you choose. It's the kind of game where if it had been made by From Software, you'd find 1,000 videos on YouTube explaining the lore and the ending and filling in the gaps in the story, because you can fill them in, both within the context of the larger world and within the time skips between each scenario. The story leaves you with just enough detail to put everything together, whilst never straying beyond the clear-cut path of death and destruction the Golden Idol carves through Albion. It's the reason why the game left me wanting more. I want to know more about this world and the people who inhabit it. I want to hear more about the crazy stuff that clearly goes on in this setting, but the answers to any questions I have just aren't relevant to the case of the Golden Idol. In that regard, the story is stripped down like a race car too, and it just wouldn't work as well in any other medium. As a book or a TV show or a movie, it would by necessity have to fill in a lot of those blanks, just as it would have to give up the momentary glimpses of each scenario which make the game so compelling by grounding you in linear time and space. As a video game, the plot is bound by no such constraints. If it doesn't matter to the idol's story, it's just not in the game, and I love it for that. It can be very easy to get lost in the source while world building, and it can be very tempting to try and include everything you've fought up, simply because you've already gone through the effort to do so. But there's something to be said for the old adage, less is more. The restraint that the Case of the Golden Idol shows not only keeps the focus on the story the game is trying to tell, but makes the wider world it takes place within that much more enticing. Not so much a case of, man, I wish we got to play that part of the backstory instead, but man, I wish I got to see what else is out there. There is so much potential in the blank spaces left in this world. I hope one day we get the chance to fill them in. The Case of the Golden Idol packs an absurd amount of content and detail into its short length. It is more than worth your money and your time. I'll be very interested to see what the developers do next, because in this case, they absolutely killed it. And that's it. This project was kind of an attack of creativity that came on very suddenly. I wanted to try my hand at making something short and succinct, just to see if I could do it, just to see if I could do it quickly, just to see if it worked. Anyway, let me know what you think down below. Not just about the video, but the game too. Like, subscribe, comment, share the video around, all that lovely stuff. I'd really appreciate it. Hopefully the next video up on this channel will be the cursed nightmare of a video essay I've been working on since the Jurassic Park retrospective, but if it isn't, it'll probably be something small again like this. Either way, I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Lazarus Hearst rises up the ranks of the Blotherhood. Lazarus Hearst rises up the ranks of the Blotherhood. I said it again. Lazarus Hearst rises up the branks. The branks?